guys, and welcome back to another YouTube video, Past Papers 101 with Miss Edwards. Thank you to all my new subscribers, and for those persons who have been watching the videos, this is the paper you have been waiting for, May-June 2022, with solutions. All questions will be answered in this video. So if you know you have friends who need to see this paper, send them the link, share this video so they can come and get some help for their exams. So we'll get right into the paper. Remember, CSEC Integrated Science Paper 2 consists of 6 questions in 2 sections, and you must answer all questions. So let's begin. Section A, question 1. The improper disposal of garbage and human waste has resulted in the pollution of the world's water bodies. List 3 methods that can be used to purify water for drinking. You can have chlorination, distillation, and boiling. And that would be for 3 marks. Next question. Describe any one of the 3 methods listed in AI above. Now I have for you all 3, even though they ask for 1, because you know that's what I do. I give you more than what they ask for, just so that you have more to remember in your exam. So 1, for boiling water for 15 minutes kills all microorganisms. After the boiling of the water, it should be cooled. 2, chlorination, you're adding 8 drops of chlorine to a gallon of water, then leave it for 30 minutes to kill microorganisms. And distillation is the method of purifying water by removing salt from it. And for any one of those, you would get 2 marks. Next question. Discarded plastic waste items have formed large islands made out of garbage in the ocean. Explain one way in which plastics may negatively impact aquatic life. So you're thinking about disadvantages of plastic to aquatic life. So the first suggestion, plastics may damage habitats of living organisms, making them more visible to predators, leading to loss of species. This could also affect the life cycle of fish, as they would not be able to reproduce, thus decreasing the total population. Another way, even though they ask for 1, I tell you guys I always give you more. Organisms may consume plastics that are harmful to health and may cause the fish to die. Examples are turtles consuming plastic bags because they look like jellyfish. And then 3, another one, plastics that form these large islands may block out sunlight, which would prevent aquatic plants from photosynthesizing. So you would just choose one of these reasons or these impacts and explain. You can always add more information to any one of these I have suggested. Next question. It says, suggest 3 measures that countries could utilize to ensure that they do not contribute to the formation of garbage islands. I have 1, ban single-use plastics such as plastic bags, straws, and disposable utensils. 2, implement laws that forbid illegal dumping of waste. 3, educate the public through campaigns. For example, the Not Dirty Up Jamaica campaign, that one is used in Jamaica. 4, give incentives to persons who practice recycling. Example, money for glass bottles. So those would be measures countries could use to ensure that persons do not contribute to garbage islands. And that's for 3 marks. Any 3, you get your 3 marks. Next part of the question. The government of country Y developed a mega farm close to the mouth of a river. Explain how establishing the farm near the river may negatively impact aquatic life. I have The farm would use pesticides and other chemicals on their crops. Some of these chemicals may get washed into the river due to rainfall, and this can cause damage to the organisms in the river, leading to death of species and destruction of habitat. Fertilizers may also get into the water, adding excess nutrients such as phosphates and nitrates, causing eutrophication, which is an overgrowth of algae. So that would be the effect of this farm close to the river. Always think about chemicals getting into the water source and what may happen, and that is for 3 marks. Moving on to the next question. Company X accidentally released effluents into a nearby river. A quality monitoring exercise was carried out by the company to determine the impact of the effluents released on the amount of dissolved oxygen in the river. The monitoring exercise showed that the oxygen level present before the river was polluted was 6.5 ppm. Table 1 shows the results of the monitoring exercise. So let's look at that table. And you know this is the graph question, guys. On the axis provided on page 7, plot a graph of distance away from the source of pollution against dissolved oxygen to represent the data in table 1. Draw a line of best fit through the points. The next thing is to label the axes on the graph, and you know the axes already. You must be able to determine what is on your y-axis and what is on your left axis. As I said before in previous videos, you can always look on the data in the table they provide, and it would give you a hint of which piece of information should go where. So let's look at the graph first of all. Remember, for most of these graphs, they already give you the numbers in place. So we see that on the bottom of the graph, the maximum amount goes up to 7, which is your x-axis. And then on your left, which is your y-axis, which is going up, the maximum amount is 80. So that is an indication to us that dissolved oxygen would go to the bottom of our graph or at our x-axis, while the distance away from the source of pollution would go on our y-axis. So we've already labeled. So let's look back at the data from the table. I know persons struggle with the graph, so I always go over the graph to show you how you plot your points. If it gives you these pieces of information, you're trying to match both numbers wherever they meet on your graph paper or on your graph sheet. So the distance away from the source of pollution is 10, and the dissolved oxygen, which is matching up with this distance, is 1. So on our graph, we're going to find the point, or we're going to find the place where both 10 and 1 meet. So let's look back at the graph. Look at the first point that I would have made. We have 10 here on this. We have 10 right here on this side of the graph on our y-axis, and then we have 1 over here on our x-axis. So I always say choose a side and just find where that number or line would go up to meet or intersect with the other. So we can start from 1. If we go up, we're trying to make sure we find a point where it matches up or intersects with 10, and this is right here. So we make a point. I always say to circle it so you have a good idea of the vicinity where your point is, and you continue. For the next point, it was 2 to 20. See, I made a point there. 3 to 30, another point there. 4 to 40, another point. 5 to 50, and 6 to 60. So we are matching up the points where they intersect, and if you look back at your table, that's exactly what I did. And to plot those points, guys, is 6 marks. It also asks us in that part of the question to draw a line of best fit through the points. Remember, when you're asked to draw a point of best fit, they're basically telling you to draw a straight line through as many points as possible. You can place your ruler at 0 and see where you can just line it up so that it passes through as many points as possible. Even if you don't get through all the points, you want to see if you can get through most of the points. If you can get it through 3 out of 6, that would be okay. You know, as long as it's on the straight part, that's what you want, for it to pass through some points. Now, you know, I'm using this pen from the PDF side here, so my line isn't as straight. So when you're using your ruler, you know you're gonna get it straighter than this. So please don't forget to work with your rulers when you're going in your exams. So when I drew this line, right, that would give me a total of 6 marks for the question. Now the next part of the question says, using the graph on page 7, determine the distance at which the river returned to the oxygen level that it was present before polluted, and they give us 6.5 ppm. Now guys, this is for 1 mark, and I always say it makes you a little puzzled, but you need not be puzzled. Look at the question. They gave us a piece of information right here. They gave us the 6.5 ppm. So what we are going to do is we're going to go to our graph and we're going to find where 6.5 ppm is, and we're going to bring it up to see where it would cut the line of best fit. Wherever we find it after we bring it across, then that would give us our answer. So if down here, guys, we're looking at dissolved oxygen, if it says 6.5, we know we'd find it smack in the middle, right between 6 and 7. We have 6.5. So I drew a dotted line going all the way up until I touched my straight line, or my line of best fit, and wherever it touched my line, I brought it across so that I could find the number which it matches up with, which would give me my answer, because it asks me for the distance away, and the distance away would be 65 miles, and that is your 1 mark. So when you see a question like that, don't get puzzled. If you know what you're doing from your graph, you will get this 1 mark as well. Next part of the question, describe the trend in the amount of dissolved oxygen in the water as the distance away from the source of pollution increases. So let's look at our table. What can we find? Remember, a trend is a pattern. So a trend is something that you should be seeing coming out from the data, and if you look at it, you realize that the numbers are increasing. So as the distance away from the pollution increases, you realize that the amount of dissolved oxygen also increases. So you're 10 miles away from the source of pollution, there is only 1 ppm of dissolved oxygen found. But as you move further and further away from the pollution, you realize that the amount of oxygen increases. So whenever they ask you for a pattern, just go back to the data and see what you can figure out based on the data you see in your table. So what I have here is that as the distance from the pollutant increases, or the source, right, the distance from the source of the pollutant increases, the greater the amount of dissolved oxygen present, and that is 1 mark. They also ask you in the next part of the question to state one conclusion that can be made about the impact of the effluents released on the amount of dissolved oxygen in the river. And this is easy, guys. Introducing pollutants results in a decrease of oxygen in rivers. So that is obvious based on the fact that the closer you are to the pollutant or the source of pollution, you don't have as much oxygen. So that is our conclusion, and that would be your 25 mark question. So moving on to question 2, it says the electricity company is about to install overhead power lines in your area. Using the formula P equals I times V, Calculate the power in the lines when the voltage is 6,400 volts and the current flow of a current is 800 amperes. Remember where you see A, it's still talking about current, and it also intersects with I. They both go interchangeably. I and A both represent current. Show your working. So guys, all they're asking you to do for this 2 marks question, they've already given you the formula and they've given you the data. So P is equal to 800, which is I, here the current. Even though it's A, I said remember, I and A both represent current, and in this section of the formula it says P is equal to I times V. So even though they don't give you a piece of data that has I, they're still talking about the current, which is the 800 amperes right here. So we plug that into our formula, 800 multiplied by the amount of voltage that we have, 6,400 volts, equals to 5,120,000 kilowatts. Moving on, and that's for 2 marks. Using the formula energy consumption equals power times time, calculate the amount of energy consumed in the lines as they supply power to 100 houses for 16 hours. So the same power we found up here, we're going to bring it down, and it's asking us for when we look at the formula, it says power times time, so the time there is 16 hours, and when we multiply that, we get 819,289,600 kilowatts, and that's for 1 mark. So they're basically giving you the formulas, guys. You just need to plug in the information. Next part of the question, use the power calculated in AI above to determine the energy produced in kilowatts per hour after 4 hours. Show your working. Remember, for kilowatts per hour, it's power times time. So this is the amount of power times the 4 equals to 20,480,000 kilowatts per hour. And those are your calculations. Next part of the question, Mrs. Eccles believes that the fuse in her toaster tends to stop working often, and she wants to try to fix it before purchasing a new one. Define the term fuse. Now, a fuse is a piece of wire designed to melt if a current larger than a particular value passes through it, and that's 1 mark. Next part of the question, explain how a fuse protects an appliance such as a toaster. And the answer is, when a fault occurs in the appliance, guys, a large amount of current will flow and it will melt the fuse. Remember before, the fuse is a piece of metal. So when you have a fault in your appliance, a large amount of current is going to flow through your appliance and it's going to melt the fuse, which is this wire. If the fuse melts, it's going to cut off the electricity supply to the rest of the circuit. So the fuse there is the little gap in between the circuit. So once the fuse burns, electricity cannot continue in the circuit. That's how it prevents your appliance from getting any further damage. So that's how a fuse works. Try and see if you can memorize that so you have that all the time, how a fuse works. Next part of the question. Complete table 2 by providing labels to identify the color codes for each of the wires used in a wiring of a house. The type of wire, we have the live, the neutral, and the earth wire. And the color codes are: live wires are represented by brown, neutral wires are represented by blue, and earth wires are represented by green and yellow. That's 3 marks, guys. Those are 3 easy marks. Try and commit those to memory: live, brown, neutral, blue, earth, green, and yellow. Moving on, list 3 first aid strategies that could be employed to help a victim who received an electric shock. 1. Use an insulator to unplug the appliance source of the electric shock. So an insulator is something that doesn't conduct electricity, so you don't want to have any metallic objects in your hand when you're trying to stop that electric source, or that source of the electricity. 2, if the victim is unconscious, then give them mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. 3, cover them with a blanket to keep them as warm as possible. And 4, give them a sweet cup of tea if they are revived to help them get over the shock. I know that one will stick with you because people in the Caribbean drink tea. So give them a cup of sweet tea if they are revived to help them get over the shock. And that's 3 marks. Remember, I always give you more than what they ask for, just in case you forget any. Next part of the question, or next question, define the term energy and state the unit in which it is measured. This is a simple one. This is for 2 marks. Energy is defined as the ability to do work, and the unit of energy is the joule. 2 marks. It says complete the flow chart in figure 1 below by describing the energy changes that take place in the internal combustion engine of a car. Now, this is the full flow chart, and it begins with petrol is burned. And they have chemical energy. Now, if something is being burnt, it must mean that there is some form of heat being produced. So chemical energy to heat, or thermal energy, is the first conversion. Then afterwards it says the piston moves and turns the crankshaft. So I have mechanical energy being converted to kinetic energy. The crankshaft turns the wheel. You have kinetic energy going to mechanical energy again, because some form of work is being done in the machine. So chemical to thermal because petrol is being burnt, then mechanical to kinetic because the piston moves and turns the crankshaft, and the final one, crankshaft turns the wheel, kinetic to mechanical energy. So we're changing from one form to the next, and that is for a total of 3 marks. We're moving along the paper nicely. Section C of that question, or part C of that question, the law of conservation of energy states that energy cannot be made or destroyed. Explain what happens to energy when it is used. The question before kind of gave you a hint as to what happens to energy when it is being used. If you said it is converted from one form to the next, you are correct. Energy is converted from one form to the next when it is used. Energy transformations occur in energy conversions. This means that energy is constantly changing from one form to another. Sometimes many transformations happen during a conversion, and some of the energy is called useful while some may be wasted. Heat energy is sometimes called wasted energy. Now guys, the question says you should explain what happens. So that's why I wrote a mouthful, because if it says explain, they want you to break down the information and tell them how much you know or how much you understand. So when you see that little word there, explain, give them or give the answer your all right, so you can secure your marks, and that's for 3 marks. D. Pollution from the use of fossil fuels is known to cause environmental damage. And we know what fossil fuels are, right? Coal, petroleum, gasoline, anything we use to fuel machines like that. Explain one negative impact of the use of fossil fuels to the environment. Now guys, when you're thinking of fossil fuels and how it affects the environment, always think about burning fossil fuels. What does the burning of fossil fuels do? So let's look at that. Fossil fuels, when burnt, one, so you know they ask for one, I give you more than one. So for one, fossil fuels when burnt produce harmful gases to the environment, which contributes to greenhouse gases and global warming. Guys, always go for global warming, climate change, greenhouse gases when they're asking about the environment. It always comes back down to those responses. 2. Fossil fuels produce gases when burnt that can contribute to acid rain that falls and damages plants and infrastructure. That's another bonus one. So acid rain is also a result of the fumes or the smoke given off when fossil fuels are burnt. 3. Fossil fuels also produce gases that contribute to smog, which affects the respiratory health of people. Smog is a mixture of these chemicals given off from fossil fuels and also car exhaust mixed in with oxygen and other natural occurring gases and even smoke, and causes that dark thick kind of haze over urban areas. So sometimes when you're watching movies or they'll show you down in India, the air kind of always looks a bit thick and dirty. That is smog. So fossil fuels, when you burn it, contributes to smog. So those are three. They ask you for one and it's for 3 marks, so just remember any of those if you're asked a question like this. 2. Recommend 2 ways in which individuals could reduce the negative impacts of the usage of fossil fuels, and give 1 reason for each recommendation. So I have 2 here. For 1, conservation of electricity by plugging out appliances when not in use. The reason is that fossil fuels are burnt to produce electricity. You know that, right? JPS burns fossil fuels to make your electricity, or any other electrical company. That's what they do. So they burn it to produce electricity. So if you use less electricity, then less is wasted, and in turn less fossil fuels need to be burnt. 2. Persons can take public transportation. The reason is that this reduces the amount of private owned vehicles on roads, so less fuel is burnt and less car exhaust is produced. Guys, remember the question asks us to give a reason for each recommendation. So once you tell them how you can reduce the negative impacts of fossil fuels, you must also tell them a reason for your recommendation. So remember, if the question has a part like a part A and a part B, please try and cover everything so you get your full marks. Next question. Complete figure 2 by identifying each of the layers of a soil profile labeled A, B, C, D, and E. Now this may throw off some persons because in some books you only have 4 layers. So we're going to look at it when you have 5 layers. Now the first layer, if it is at the uppermost level of the soil profile where you have plants, the shoot systems of plants, leaves, trees, we call that the leaf litter or humus. That's where you find the organic matter, or you find your plants living. Then we have topsoil. Topsoil is where we find plant roots. Then after topsoil you have subsoil, then parent material, then bedrock. So if you are given a 5-layer profile, start with leaf litter, then topsoil, then subsoil, then parent material, then bedrock. If you're given a 4-layer soil profile, more than likely they're starting with the topsoil, then subsoil, and so on. And that's for 5 marks, guys. The pH layer C is 5.5. Based on the pH value, classify layer C as either acidic, basic, or neutral. If you see 5.5, you know it's acidic already. Mr. Thomas, part C, has started a kitchen garden in his backyard. However, the plants are not growing as well as expected. Explain how the pH of the soil could be impacting soil fertility. Think about it. Acidic soil. How could it affect how fertile the soil is? Let's go. Let's look at the responses. Let's look at the answers. Since the soil is acidic, guys, the acids in the soil are going to react with the mineral nutrients. Remember, nutrients are in the soil, so acids can react with those nutrients, which can cause them to form compounds which are leached through the soil past the roots of the plant. When you see that word leach there, it just means that they soak through. So they start leaving the soil by just going further and further down, out of reach of the plant roots. So they will not get those nutrients. So they're leached. Also, acidic environments are not good for most living organisms who are living in the soil. And they usually are important because those microorganisms or living organisms help to break down decaying material. So if the soil is acidic, and those organisms do not like acidic soil, more than likely they're going to leave or they're going to die. Thus, they would not be breaking down any plant material or animal material to make more nutrients for the soil. So, when you think about soil fertility and acidity, or acidic soil, think about the organisms living there and think about the fact that the acid is going to react with the nutrients already existing in the soil. All right, and that's for 3 marks, guys. Hope you're enjoying the video so far. Remember to subscribe if you have not subscribed as yet. D. Explain the importance of each of the following components of soil. We have humus. Humus is rich in organic matter. It adds nutrients to the soil, it improves soil texture, and aids in aeration and helps in retaining moisture in the soil. So that's the purpose of humus. That's for 3 marks. Air. Air is needed for the survival of microorganisms that live in the soil. And you know, microorganisms are your fungi and your bacteria that help in breaking down decaying material to add nutrients to the soil. Also allows for aeration for water to move through soil and aids in drainage so that root rot does not occur. So air is important for the microorganisms, and it's also important to allow soil to pass through, the water to pass through the soil easily, and also for drainage so that it doesn't keep too much of that water too long for roots to rot. Next question. And we've reached section B, guys. We've reached section B, so we're almost on our way. 2 questions to go. Define the term biodegradable. Biodegradable means that something can break down naturally by microorganisms, and you could add in the environment to that definition. B. Ship vessels usually dock at ports with a number of waste items on board. Classify each of the following waste items found on a ship as either biodegradable or non-biodegradable. So the first one you saw already, expired food would be biodegradable. Food can be broken down in the environment naturally by microorganisms. Food is either plant-based or animal-based. So anything you can eat is usually biodegradable. Plastic food containers, they cannot be broken down naturally in the environment, so they are non-biodegradable. Glass beverage bottles, they cannot be broken down in the environment naturally either. Styrofoam cups, neither can they be broken down. So out of the 4, expired food is biodegradable and the other 3 are non-biodegradable. That's for 4 marks. Next question. Explain why proper waste management is important. Now this question, you would have your common knowledge, so just make sure you flesh out your point. It's explain again, so tell them what you know. You talk about the fact that it reduces the amount of pollutants in the environment. Obviously not true. If you have proper waste management, then you will not have a lot of pollutants in your environment, so that's obvious, which would cause problems to human health, right, and other living organisms. It would also help in reducing the cost of manufacturing, as less natural resources would need to be sourced. If we practice recycling, then the material could be used continuously without needing to get new resources. So it reduces cost, it helps our environment, and it also helps to reduce the amount of problems caused to human health. So you're just telling why something is important to do. That's for 3 marks. Next part of the question. Small rodent droppings were noticed around a vessel that docked at a port. recommend 2 sanitary measures that could be used to eliminate the rodents and give 1 reason for each sanitary measure recommended. So I have the first method, and this should be easy because everybody at some point has had to deal with rodents. So you're basically now telling back on the paper what are ways you can get rid of these rodents. So the first one, setting traps. Setting physical traps would help to reduce the population within the environment, right? They would not be able to reproduce, leading to an increase in numbers. So if you get rid of the rodents, whether it be by one or whether you have a large trap that would get rid of a lot of them at the same time, they wouldn't be able to reproduce, therefore their numbers would decrease, so they do not get to increase their numbers. The second one I suggested was eliminating all food sources. We know rodents come around when there is an available supply, or there is a readily available supply of food. So all food sources need to be secured and made rodent proof by placing in thick plastic covered buckets. Rodents would have no food, right? So this is the reason, and they will starve to death or leave the area in order to find food, and this is 4 marks. So I know you guys would be able to manage a question like this because it is all about your common knowledge, your general knowledge of what to do in certain situations. The next part of the question says, explain how biogas production could assist with waste management on the vessel. Now this term here, biogas, is talking about fuel that is made from organic material, and usually this is talking about feces from animals or organic matter such as plant-based or animal-based food waste, right? So what happens is we place these organic scrap materials, the food, in a machine called that biodigester, and under heat and certain moist conditions, bacteria actually breaks down the food scraps and can turn it into gas that we can use for cooking. So it says, explain how biogas production would assist with waste management on the vessel. So the organic waste from the ship can be used to produce biogas that could be used to cook using your stoves. This would also reduce the amount of garbage on the ship at any given time, and it may also reduce the rodent population because their food supply will decrease, right? That's for 3 marks. And we're on to the last question. We're on to the last part of the paper. Describe the following methods of fishing that are used in the Caribbean. The first one is the harpoon. The harpoon, divers use a spear with a shaft, and a barbed point is thrown and used for catching large fish. That's how they use a harpoon. That's for 2 marks. The next one is trapping using of fishing pots. 3-dimensional wire or wood frames with chicken wire is made with an opening to let fish in, but it is difficult for them to swim out. This is used to catch organisms that live on the seafloor. So we know fish pots are used to catch like crabs and shrimp and other crustaceans, and lobsters. So those are the ways in which those 2 methods of fishing are used. Another part of the question says, list 3 methods of fishing other than harpoon fishing and trapping. Think about it, guys. What would you suggest? I have trawl nets, rod and line, spear fishing, or long lines. So these would be other methods of fishing. Guys, I'm realizing that they do have some questions on fishing coming, so if you could just make sure you have a little knowledge on that, just in case they do bring back some of those questions to the paper that you're going to be doing. Next part of the question, it says some fishermen would like to use a metal fishing pot, or they'd like to use metal fishing pots. However, they are concerned about rusting. Discuss how the environment in which the fishermen work could contribute to the rusting of the fishing pots. I have rusting occurs in the presence of moisture and oxygen. The sea contains water and the open air is rich in oxygen. The salt in the seawater also increases the rate at which rusting occurs due to the free ions in the salt. And this is for 4 marks, guys. So they're asking you to just state how the fact about they're just asking you, sorry, to state why the fish pots would rust because of the environment. So you just talk about the fact that there's moisture present, there's a lot of oxygen, and there's a lot of salt in the water. Next part of the question, discuss one method that could be used to prevent rusting in the fishing pots. And there are 2 methods I have here. You have painting. So by painting the metal, the metallic ions are protected from the moisture, salt, and oxygen. And by preventing contact with the metal, rusting cannot occur. And the second method is galvanizing. And this is where iron metal is coated with a less reactive metal such as zinc. The iron is dipped in hot molten zinc to create a coat on it, and this would protect it from the elements, so it would not come in contact with the oxygen, the moisture, or the salt. And that is the end of the test. This was the integrated science paper 2 for 2022. If you like this video, subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, comment. I thank you for your support and all the best on your exams. Remember to share the link so that other persons can have a chance of preparing for the exams. All the best again, guys, and remember, with God all results can be distinctions.